just forming a story isn't enough. Like, is it the story? Is it the best story you can tell? And is this the best fish you're going to catch today, or is this the first fish you caught today?
My name is Ben Charland, and you're listening to What on Earth is Going On. My guest this week is Christopher MacBride, a Canadian filmmaker whose previous work includes Sleep Lab and The Conspiracy. His upcoming film is called The Education of Fredrick Fitzell. We spoke in his Toronto studio about a lot of different things in film and in creativity. Analogies, and lots of them are in this conversation: writing, editing, the idea of cutting a movie down to its perfect size, and what it means to be that efficient and economical. Money and marketing in the movies, and how they influence not just the creative process, but how a movie is received before you've even seen it. Streaming services like Netflix and their effect on the industry and on us. And finally, Chris tells us about his newest project. Now, if you like this podcast, please give it a rating on iTunes or Facebook or whatever podcast app that you use, and go to the website, whatonearthisgoingon.ca, for all previous episodes and to get in touch with me about this episode or any other, and to let me know what you think of the show in general. You can also reach out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Let me know what you think of the show, give it a rating, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. All right, Chris MacBride, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming.
My pleasure.
So I'm really excited to chat with you. You're a filmmaker here in Toronto and have been doing filmmaking, I think, for over 10 years now. Is that right?
Yeah, it's always tough to put a exact time frame around it, because I've been basically trying to be a filmmaker since I was 5. So
right.
It's there were years and years of technically being a filmmaker but not having any traction with it. But yeah, I think I'd say I guess I try to line it up with when did I quit my last day job that had nothing to do with film, and that was in 2006 was my sort of screw it moment when I was like, I'm never doing a job like this again. So yeah, so I guess whatever that is, 13 years now. Yeah,
that's not bad to get rid of the Joe job so long ago and
exactly.
be doing real work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the first question that I always have is always the same: what on earth is going on? Deliberately broad. To get a deliberately broad response, we can talk about whatever you want. So, Chris, what on earth is going on?
I think I probably have no idea what on earth is going on, because I'm editing my movie and I'm stuck in this cave-like editing suite. So the World War III could have broken out and I wouldn't know. I often feel, when I'm editing a film, I feel like Will Smith in the beginning of Independence Day, the first 20 minutes of Independence Day happens and the world's invaded and all this stuff goes on, and then 20 minutes in, Will Smith wakes up in Los Angeles with a different time zone and has no clue what's happened. That's what I feel like a lot when I'm editing, because my phone's not on. I'm in this dark room with this other man, both of us sweaty and smelly, and just staring at the screen for 15 hours a day, and then I walk out and remember there's life outside the edit suite. So I'm way out of tune with anything going on the earth right now. I
remember that scene in Independence Day. He walks out of his house, walks up to the front of his grass, opens the paper, sees people to his right and to his left packing their cars, freaking out. The postman's pointing at the spaceship, and then he pulls down the paper and sees it.
Yeah,
such a wonderful moment, because it reintroduces us to what's happened.
Yeah, totally.
From a different perspective.
I think every single time I sleep in, which is rare these days, but if I ever sleep in till 10:30 or something, I always wake up and think of that scene. I've just missed something. Something's happened in the world. There's been some attack or some big news or something. Yeah.
Do you think that that's an important part of the creative process, to kind of insulate yourself from the world so that you can focus on the story that you're telling?
Yes. I mean, you sort of, whether you choose to do it or not, it inevitably happens. It's such an all-consuming thing. I think making any art is all-consuming, but filmmaking in particular, it's I have 3 kids, and when I was shooting the film, my last film that I made, I didn't even see them. I have a 1-year-old who, was a different person when I finished shooting, and he didn't recognize me, I didn't recognize him. And it's, that's obviously a horrible thing and a horrible feeling, but you sort of have no choice. You exist in this weird circus bubble of it's somewhere, it's a cross between like a military operation and a circus that's like almost off the rails, and you're just in that bubble. And yeah, there's very little else that like you have time for. It's next to impossible to make a film and also have any kind of life or hobby. For me at least. Maybe other people have some kind of weird Zen-like balance, but I don't know what it is.
Is that the life of the director, or is that exacerbated by the fact that you write your own stuff as well?
I think it's mainly the life of a director, but it's definitely exacerbated by the writing, because the writing's just more of that process tacked on to the front end. So, when I'm writing, it depends on what kind of writing you're doing. If you're writing and you're just sort of writing on your own, and there's nobody waiting for your writing, like when I started out in the business and I was writing all these scripts and I would finish them, but then there was no one to read them and no one cared. In that case, there's no deadline, and so you wake up late, you get a coffee, to play with your kids, you do whatever, and you get a little bit of writing in, and then you watch your show, and then years go by before you finish something. But when you like are being paid to do it and you have a deadline, then that's when the pressure's on, and you really, I lose my mind. I think it happens to everybody. I think it's kind of a universal thing, but you completely live in the story that you're creating, and because it's a difficult thing. It's not like, almost every other job, if you buckle down and put in like elbow grease, you can get it done, but when you're writing, elbow grease isn't always the only thing you need. You need like luck and inspiration, and you really have to like allow your brain to be in a place where it's coming up with things out of nothing. And that's a weird thing. It's like you can go to the gym and exercise your bicep, but you can't exercise your brain in the same way. And so it's sort of like David Lynch always uses the analogy of fishing. When you're trying to write or you're trying to get ideas, it's like fishing. So all you can do is you choose your boat, you choose your fishing rod, you choose the bait you put on the end, and you choose the spot on the lake. But ultimately, you have to just throw it in and hope a fish bites. You can't make that fish bite, and the lake being your subconscious. And so that's a tricky and stressful thing when you're under the gun and there's money on the line and there's people waiting, and you're like, look, I'm squeezing my brain as hard as I can. The fish isn't biting, and so that just the nature of that kind of weird way to be creative, like, puts this very specific kind of pressure on you that makes it become all-consuming. Because when you finish another job, you can sort of like put it down, and then now I'm going home to do home stuff, or now I'm going with my friends to do friend stuff. But when you're stuck in your writing, your brain is your tool, and so you're always needing it to be thinking of things. So I find myself, like, if I'm out with my friends or something, I'm not really with them. If I'm really in the middle of writing, I'm around them, I'm doing things with them, but my brain is constantly chugging away, trying to figure out, trying to solve these problems in this like imaginary world I've created. And until I'm like finished, it's really you're always there. At least I'm always there. So yeah, it's a strange thing.
I'm really glad you put it that way, because I talk about writing sometimes on this show, and it's really interesting because some of the most one of the biggest common refrains for writers is, it's a muscle. Just exercise the muscle and it will come. And as you say, that's partly true. A fisherman with muscles is better than a fisherman without. In the same way that Tiger Woods was a great golfer, probably still is a great golfer. I don't really follow golf, but because he was fit in a way that other golfers didn't see the need to be fit. But it wasn't the whole game, obviously. He's also a great golfer because of the other things that he did, because he exercises judgment. And I think it was Martin Amis, the British writer, who said that writing is a process that consists of nothing but making decisions on paper. And when you make a decision, sure, like for example, a judge in a courtroom has had many years of practice of making decisions, but that's not the only thing. It's not just the muscle of making decisions that goes into it. It's also the exercising of judgment and the ability to have your life experiences and all the things that you've read and the people that you've met feed into that, but also have the patience to know and the patience to wait until something right happens, and to not force it or rush it, but to know that until that right thing comes, all you can do is fill all the things that are around it, and do the work that you can do, but you can't just force that to happen. And I think that's a necessary tidbit for the creative process.
Yeah, and like you say about the judgment thing, going back to the fishing analogy, when you do catch fish, you have to know which fish to keep and which fish to throw back in the lake, and that's a tricky thing. And I guess it's kind of a cliche at this point, but the Gladwell 10,000 hours thing is so appropriate. It's that's something that just comes with time. When you're forming a story, whether it's a novel or a script or whatever it is so difficult. Like from beginning to end to like fill it all in is super hard. And when you get to a point where you do actually finish a story, you can get sort of amazed with yourself and like, oh my God, I've got a beginning, a middle, and end. I've got these characters, and it all wraps up. And then because it's so hard to finish it, once you do just have a story in place, there's a sort of impulse to just be satisfied with it and just be like, well, I got a story. That's good enough. That's so hard. But I think the extra thing, the difference, how do you become not just a golfer but Tiger Woods, is to know, just forming a story isn't enough. Like, is it the story? Is it the best story you can tell? And is this the best fish you're going to catch today, or is this the first fish you caught today? So yeah, that's sort of like judgment and how to sort of know. When you can come up with an idea for some sort of plot point that makes perfect sense, but is it the most creative sort of thing that you could have come up with? And then, of course, you can drive yourself crazy wondering about this forever. Maybe you do catch the best fish, but think there's a better one out there and throw it away. So there's a million sort of ways to get lost in the labyrinth of your own mind and never get it done. But
well, at some point, done is better than perfect.
True.
And there's another point of this process too, is to make sure that you only have the fish and not a bunch of seaweed with the fish. Or to continue the analogy, when you cook the fish, you're only cooking the stuff that you need, and you discard the rest of the stuff. And I know that that's a critical part of writing, but also filmmaking and theater and whatever, is that if it's not necessary, then it's probably not good. And which is a really hard discipline, because we watch a lot of movies all the time that have a bunch of fluff in them. But the best movies are the ones, for me, where everything is needing to be there. Every character, every line, every scene, every image fits in, and not just to the plot or the characters, but the theme of the film. And, some writers have said that a well-written story is one where if you cut out a single word or sentence, the whole thing will fall apart. So if you can cut out a sentence and not have it fall apart, maybe it's that thing that you need to cut. But again, I mean, I've heard other writers say and film directors say that sometimes it's the additional, not fluff, but just the fun thing that we put in that makes the movie, even though it just seems maybe gratuitous.
Yeah, I mean, I had this exact conversation recently when I was I'm editing my movie currently, and both in writing and editing, they're very similar things. You're basically rewriting the film in the edit, and the first assembly of the edit that we did for this film was like 2 hours and 40 minutes, and we looked at it and thought, like, I don't see anywhere you can cut. Like, I don't see a single thing that we don't need in this movie. I don't know how we're going to cut this down. And today, currently, it's at 1 hour and 50 minutes. So almost an entire hour has been cut out from the point where we thought it was impossible. And that happens to me with script writing too, where you just look at it and you're like, this is tight, and, everything is, but it really takes, some space and objectivity and other people to look at it to tell you, where the fat is and where the fluff is. But like you say, on the other hand, I was talking with my editor about this. There's a scene in the film right now that it's towards the end of the film, and it kind of slows things down, and it feels like this extraneous sort of extra thing apart from the story. And a lot of people are like, it really slows the movie down. We kind of want to get to the ending, and it feels like this thing that you could cut, which could be true ultimately. But the other side of the coin is that I use the analogy, not that this film is anywhere on the level of 2001 or I'm anywhere on the level of Stanley Kubrick, but just to use 2001 as an example, I'm sure a lot of people, probably politely whispered to Stanley Kubrick, at the end of 2001, maybe you don't need the old man in the bed and the eating of the dishes, and like that whole thing takes so long to get through, and it's not really relevant to the plot, and what would that movie be if he had listened to them? Like if he hadn't kept, it's like, I know you could end it at the Star Baby sequence. I know you could just have this light show and then end it, and it would be a lot more crowd pleasing. But like, I want to put this poetic, long, empty, musicless thing at the end that flies in the face of conventional story editing, and and obviously, film history is better for it. So it's always, but of course, everybody thinks they're doing that scene, and maybe they're not doing that scene. Maybe their
right.
scene is light years away from the quality of that. But still, it's always this tricky balancing act of, what is unnecessary to the story, and what is, like you say, this maybe little flight of fancy that actually is the color that makes it all come to life. So
Yeah, I've heard that that 2001: A Space Odyssey. Some people have argued, like it's obvious. I find it a wonderful film. It can be very difficult to get through, but I also think that it's not necessarily the same kind of film that you go to see on a Saturday night or you watch on Netflix. It's just not the same category of things. You shouldn't be watching it in the same way. You shouldn't be looking for the same things. It's a different, more meditative experience. It's using the same tools, but it's kind of like going to an art gallery and looking for naturalistic painting and finding yourself in a room full of Picasso and Goya and stuff that's kind of out of this world, and expecting to apply what you know about naturalism to those other forms, when in fact they're two kind of different things. But Kubrick, to many filmmakers, has kind of, I don't know, made it hard for them to just, cut the fat and do what their film should be, as opposed to making it this brilliant 3-hour poetic statement. And it's hard because they're different beasts, but Kubrick's whole legacy is one where he chose to do the risky thing time and time and time and time again. And we are better for it. But it's also sending a lot of people down this dark path of maybe making a film that they're not ready to make yet, or that's not the film that they actually have in mind. And I don't know, is that a dangerous thing as a filmmaker, or is it liberating?
Well, I mean, I think it's. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for every filmmaker to think they're Stanley Kubrick. You should put your goals lofty. I mean, I think a lot of filmmakers don't want to be like, a lot of them don't aspire to that, but I think many do, and I think that's it's kind of a good thing. Like, I always think, like, really try to tell an epic story. Like, epic doesn't mean big in terms of what's going on, but like, try to do something different. Try to do something that's cuts through the noise, something that's specific to you and like no one else could do. That to me is a big thing. Like, what is it about the film you're making, the story that you're telling, that only you could tell, is, I think, always a thing I try to keep in mind. That, like, if I start feeling like, I could see somebody else making this movie, I could see so-and-so filmmaker doing, then it's not right. It's you want to sort of try to at least feel like you're discovering plutonium a little bit, like you want to do something new. And on the runtime thing, I mean, I think, I'm just thinking about it now, but I feel like filmmakers, all the sort of big, lauded, respected filmmakers, most of them do have longer films. Maybe not all to the Kubrick level, but you don't see many, quick, 90-minute David Fincher films, or like Tarantino or Chris Nolan or Gaspar Noé, or any, like, these people make long films, and I think it's like, it's a trust thing, where you have to first, the filmmaker almost has to earn the respect of the audience to have them trust them for that long. Like, and also, like, with just all the powers that be in filmmaking that determine whether you get funding and stuff like that, they have to trust you as well. Like, everybody, it's the first note everyone says when they read a script or they see an edit is shorter, 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 shorter. Everyone always wants things shorter. We don't want to lose the audience. We don't want to lose the audience. But I think as your career builds, hopefully, and you do, people start to trust your vision, I think then they allow you to go a little bit longer with runtime, and they allow you to tell longer stories, and because they trust that it's not just this self-indulgent flight of fancy, and there is like a vision here, and there's a reason that we're stuck in the seat for 2.5, 3 hours. So yeah, I mean, it's. But then on the other hand, another filmmaker I love, Gaspar Noé. He does these big 3-hour epics that are purposely grinding you down, and that's part of the process. He wants to sort of hypnotize you and exhaust you and wear you out, and it's like an experience as much as it is a story you're being told. His new film is like a really quick, hour and a half, and so he's kind of going in the opposite direction. But yeah, I mean, as much as possible, I think it's the story. Like, does the story need it or not? Like, do you really need this runtime to tell this story, or can you tell it in a more efficient way? And I think even the so-called masters would agree with it. You have to be a slave to the story. If the story necessitates it, you do it. If it doesn't, you don't.
Right, and looking at it from the outside perspective in, I think you hit on a really key point there, which is trust, right? So when I go to a film by Stanley Kubrick or Steven Spielberg or Christopher Nolan or something like that, I'm putting myself in their hands, and I know because of my previous experience or from what I've heard or the reviews or whatever that they're going to show me something great, right? They've been tested. They may be no different from a filmmaker who's made nothing yet in terms of what product they produce, but I will sit through a 10-second silent sunrise in that movie because, it's Christopher Nolan telling me something profound. Well, why is that any more profound than a filmmaker who I haven't heard of? Or a story that I have no idea what it's about or where it's coming from. It really isn't any different, but what I bring to it, the context that I bring to it. And that's a real challenge for a filmmaker to create that context. And so much of it comes in marketing that a filmmaker has no power over. The contextual power of not just the trailer, but the poster and the word of mouth that comes out, enables me to see a film in a certain way when I come into the cinema. And if I know that the 10-second sunrise is brilliant, well, then I will wait for it, even if it was gratuitous in the editing room to do. And I don't know if you have thought much about this in terms of context, but when you're creating your films, do you put much thought to how this will be perceived before people walk into the cinema?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to. I try to just make the best movie I can. But yeah, I mean, it's a weird filmmaking is a weird section of of the artistic experience, because it's not like you do a painting, you just do it the best you can, and then it's there, and then maybe you make it, you have a collection, then you do a show or something, or maybe you just sell it for $5 or whatever. But filmmaking is such a global, hugely consumed art form that there's so many different ways people look at films. Some people think of them as something to put on while they're doing laundry in the background. Some people think of them as exclusively as Netflix, on a Saturday night. Some people think of going to the cinema and want to go to art cinemas, and some people think of them as high art. Some people think of them as just I just want to see a comedy, or I just want to see horror. There's so many different perceptions to it, and there's so much money involved in it. It's so expensive to make a movie. It's so expensive to market it, and it's so hard to break through the noise to have people get attention for a film. So there's just so many ways after you kill yourself finishing a film and then sort of hand it off to the world. It's so out of your control. It can win an Oscar, or it can be absolutely ignored and be the same film. There's so many factors outside of your control, and like you say, down to the poster. Some not the film I'm currently working on, but the last one I did, we unfortunately were with sort of the wrong distributor, let's say, in the U.S., and they just made all these horrible decisions and made the worst poster in the world and had a spoiler for the film on the poster and just marketed it terribly. And, it was a disaster. And it was it's one of those things, there's really nothing you can do, especially as the director, it's the producers and different people who, decide on those deals and decide who the distributor is. And then the world, or at least, the people out in the world who see it, they perceive your film differently because of how it was marketed. They think of it as a big or small film based on how it was marketed, based on the poster, and all that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you just try not to think about and, just, get it done as best you can, and then, pray to the gods of filmmaking.
Well, that happened to me before I watched your film, The Conspiracy, which was released in 2012 or 2013?
2013, yeah.
So when I watched that film, before I watched it, what I read about it is that it is a horror film, right? And that's how it's marketed, and so my fiance wouldn't watch it with me. And I don't particularly like horror films either, but I went to watch it to do research for this episode and realized pretty quickly that this is not, for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, not a horror movie at all, and much, much more than that. Some people like horror movies, and I think there are elements to The Conspiracy that would satisfy them, but it's much, much different and much more profound. To me, the only horror in the movie is the last 5 minutes, which any thrilling movie has, where you should be afraid for what's happening. That happened to me when I watched The Conspiracy, and it took me a long time to shake. And it was only 30 minutes in that I was able to, adjust my paradigm a little bit and watch it in the way that it was probably intended to watch it, which is kind of like a detective story, right? And then a story of bravery, and also the story of two people who are entering into a cult, so to speak, but they only do it because they're together. And one of them is only doing it because he's following the other, but the other probably wouldn't have done it alone. Or I don't think so. Anyways, I found that a really interesting experience. So is that an example of where marketing can get in the way of a movie?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I understand why people try to market it as a horror film. There are, like you say, at the end, it gets kind of really scary, but there's no way any rational person would call it a horror film. But it was a strange thing, even though you're totally right. Like it was completely sort of false advertising to say it's a horror film. It got really embraced by the horror community in a weird way. Like all these horror film festivals just ate it up, and horror publications and stuff, and just that whole sort of subgenre, like that whole community of people, like really championed it, which was strange. So I can't, even though it's totally inaccurate to call it a horror. That was in a weird way. It kind of was okay, just because it really they loved it for whatever reason. Maybe the horror community liked the fact that it was something that hopefully was just so different. It's maybe a little bit more elevated than like a standard horror film, and that's felt right to them in that community to have a film like that at their festival. But whatever the reason was, it was interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think all the films, my film I'm making now, and all the scripts that are sort of in development, inching their way to getting made, none of them fit into genre labels easily. Like they're all, it's sort of scary, but also sort of a drama, but also sort of a thriller, and like. I don't think I'll ever make a movie that's like squarely just one genre, and that's tough because people want to put labels on everything.
Well, and that almost always happens after the fact, and I think that you would be reducing yourself if you decided on the genre first, whether you're writing a book or a screenplay, because to me, what this conversation is exposing is how false these hard lines actually are. So I think the reason why The Conspiracy is so well received in the horror community, because it was supposed to fit into that genre in terms of marketing, and it also has some elements of it. So therefore, it can elevate the genre by commenting on it, but by bringing it out of itself in a way. And I guess by that I mean the movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is often seen as a romantic comedy. I don't think of that movie at all as a romantic comedy. But if we put it in that barrel for a while, it might make the barrel bigger. Mm-hmm. It might make us think of romantic comedy, whatever that is, in a larger, broader, more interesting way, in the same way that The Conspiracy may make us think of horror in a more interesting way. And I think that horror movies can learn a lot from that film and the way that it was shot. And there's a whole, I don't know how long it is, but I'm assuming about 20 minutes where the four corners are absent because it's this circular small camera on the two guys' tie bar, mm-hmm. and it creates a sense of claustrophobia, which is conducive to a horror movie and to fear. But I can't imagine any movie where there isn't some element of fear. Maybe not horror, but fear that the character isn't going to get what they want, fear that they're going to miss their opportunity. These elements are common to all stories. And I think that putting things in genres like we do, and seem to be doing much more with Netflix, for example, where everything is in their bucket, is dangerous to the art of film, but also problematic for the viewer who might be missing a pretty wonderful experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the biggest things I always bump up against is that, when you write a script, right when you give it to the first producer you give it to, they want to know what genre it is. It's the first thing they want to know. When it goes to all the different, people that can fund it, they want to know what genre it is right away. And they want to think ahead and think, who is the built-in audience for this kind of movie? And if you're trying to tell a story that doesn't fit in one of those boxes neatly, it's a lot harder to get funding. And then when you finish the film, it's a lot harder even for festival programmers to know, like, where, does this belong at our festival or doesn't it belong? So people want to, it's not just, filmmaking, it's probably like all, areas of life, people want to, they're not comfortable with the abstract or the, something that's not definable. And so you want to just get your label maker out and write, this is the name of this thing, so I know what other things it can go with that have the same name. And that's not, I don't think, what art's supposed to be. It's supposed to like be, about taking labels off things. And so yeah, it's very difficult. And I think Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, that's a perfect example. Like that's a movie about love and about a relationship, which is what in theory all romantic comedies are about. But it's pure art. It's elevated to such a high level that it's like it instantly kind of widens the box that romantic comedies are in. So yeah, that's the hope you want to do with all movies.
Well, and we're talking about universals here. I mean, even The Conspiracy is a movie in the end about love and a relationship, or two relationships and the conflict therein, and or multiple relationships. But I think this idea of love is not monopolized by the romantic comedy. But one thing that kind of goes hand in hand with this, drawing of hard lines and genres is the idea that films are often created by a committee, right? This very collaborative art form, which is inspiring in one way, but also very, very difficult. I remember Patton Oswalt's, the comedian, his sketch about, writing a screenplay, and how many layers and how difficult it is, because you have to essentially please hundreds of different of people before it even gets to a wider audience. Can you comment a bit about what it means to make a film when you have to collaborate with so many people, not just your editor in the room, obviously, which is a very intimate form of collaboration, but there's so many other levels and layers to it as well. Do you find that difficult or inspiring? Is that a positive or a negative or both?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's different kinds of collaboration. There's the people you're collaborating with because they have money. That's the first kind of collaboration. And there's people you're collaborating with on actually making the film. So people that you're collaborating with because they have money, are the people financing the film. Sometimes it's producers, often not though. And those people, I wouldn't call it so much a collaboration as it's sort of like a hostage negotiation. You're trying to basically let them, let the kid go. Just let them come to me. I'm gonna take the gun away, and the gun being the threat of them not financing your film. So you have to, it's an art form in itself to know how to deal with that stuff. And if you're doing something with a studio, like a big studio down in Hollywood, it becomes an even trickier hostage negotiation. And a lot of times, I'll be in a room in a studio, and you're talking, they're giving you notes on your script that you've sort of slaved away on for maybe a year or something, and you can't help think to yourself sometimes, like, who is this person that's giving me notes? Like some accountant that went to Harvard, and what qualifies you to tell me about this other than the fact that you're working here? And that's not always the case. There's super, super smart people at studios too that are creative filmmakers in themselves. But a lot of times, whether it's, not just studios, but sales agencies or whoever it is, all the powers that be, all the gatekeepers, a lot of times, you're sort of everybody's opinion, a film is subjective and everybody's opinion matters, but it can get very frustrating when you're just I don't know exactly why I'm listening to your ideas on this, but I have to. So you have this art of sort of making people feel like they're being listened to without taking their horrible idea and ruining your movie, which is a crazy balancing act. But then the other kind of collaboration with the people who you're actually making with, I guess that's a harder question to answer. I mean, people have different views on, how much a filmmaking should be a collaboration versus a dictatorship. And I'm probably, because I'm a director, I'm on the side of I still believe, there's the old saying, film is the last true dictatorship, and it should be it has to be one person's voice. It's a director's medium. Whether I write my own stuff, but whether you do or you don't, and you get the script, once the director takes the script, everything has to be filtered through him. And I think movies by committee, movies where the director doesn't have complete control, are 99 times out of 100 worse for it. I think a director should, but a good director collaborates. A good director listens. A good director is open-minded to other people's ideas. So I think it has to be a dictatorship, but you got to be a good dictator. You have to know how to listen to your generals and know how to realize you can lose your objectivity and get into a bubble yourself. But yeah, I mean, you have to collaborate. Your cinematographer, your DP is one of your biggest partnerships when you're shooting, and you have to have a language with him, and you have to trust him, and he has to, he knows a million things you don't know as a director usually, and you have to, that's a collaboration. That's another artist you're working with to create something. The production designer who, creates all the sets and everything, like you have to collaborate with them. I can't build the sets. I don't know how to, I don't know how to even plan out the sets. I only know how, like, what I see in my vision, and they have to bring it to life. And so, like, the costume designer and makeup, the actors especially, you have to you sort of have this circus of people you're working with. The composer, the editor, like, all these people are like vital parts of the process that that are all true artists, that you all have to sync them all up with your vision. And so it's not, it's not a myth. It truly is a collaborative process, but it has to be collaborative with one leader, one person who's ultimately, the standard bearer for what's going in the film.
One of the themes of this conversation is the role of the director and how hard it is to manage that. Earlier in this conversation, Chris said that filmmaking is a cross between a military operation and a circus. And coming up, he says that it's unnatural to ask a director to be so good at so many different things. Some of them do it, but most of them can't, because there are so many things to be good at, whether it's liaising with producers, making sure actors are funneling their creativity in the right way, making sure that the production is on schedule and on budget, and making sure that the vision, the singular vision, is being matched in the film that we actually and finally see in the theater. All that's coming up on this episode of What on Earth is Going On. Well, and for me, the key part of that is one voice, right? And you mentioned that, and it's the same when I'm reading a book or watching a film or looking at a painting. There's one singular voice, even if it was contributed to by thousands of others, right? Steve Jobs famously said that we don't hire smart people to tell them what to do. We hire smart people to tell us what to do. But the key part of that is that we still hire them. We're not hiring them to be over us. We're not hiring them so that we can be demoted. And so that's the interesting balancing act. And for a creative person or for the CEO of a company, I assume, is that you have to have your singular voice, but also take in all of the information and know that someone might say something which is not necessarily right, but a better idea, a stronger idea, a better place to go, and to have the humility and also the judgment to say, okay, we'll go fishing in that pond for a little while and see what we can catch, because it might make our product something better in the end. And I think that's a really, really difficult thing to balance, because I'd assume that when you have that singular voice, you can get drunk with it, like you can get in the echo chamber or the bubble, like you're experiencing now in the editing suite, where it's so all consuming, and you've seen the same thing over and over and over again, but you also know that some guy can't just walk in and tell you what to do. That it can't work that way. There's some kind of balance here, and that must be probably, looking as I do from the outside in, one of the most critical skills that a filmmaker can have.
Yeah, 100%. And it's there's so many times you can look at directors' careers, and you look at sort of when they didn't have freedom in the beginning and they had constraints on them. Sometimes they made better movies when they were, everyone always looks at the original Star Wars films, and like when there were constraints on George Lucas, he did the best work he ever did, and then when he had all the freedom in the world, it didn't go so well. And that's not just him, it happens with so many filmmakers. But the opposite is also true. Like a lot of filmmakers, again, going back to Stanley Kubrick, he made all these studio system films in the beginning that were still, there was some art to them, but they were much more straightforward. And then as he gained more respect and more freedom, he was able to tell more philosophical, personal stories, and he, blossomed and blossomed and blossomed. And that happens as well. And, yeah, I mean, you know, again, it's being a good dictator. Like it's knowing how to, your film, it's always about making sure everything's about the film and not your ego. It's the director on set is expected to know everything. He's expected to have every answer, every actor's question, is this prop supposed to be red or blue? Is the curtain open or closed? Is the camera here or here? Is it this lens or that lens? Like all directing is answering a million questions every day. And you have to know the answer. You have to, like, as soon as you don't, as soon as you show some indecision, people start to lose trust in your directing ability. And so, and this is the oldest, it's every director always says this, but the dirty secret is that you don't know all the answers. You don't know when the actor says, like, why would I do this if I, grew up here and I should have this accent, blah, blah. You don't always know the answer, and you have to bullshit and like act like you do and think on your feet. And but you have to stay open to the idea that other people's ideas could be better than you, and all that matters is the movie. I remember the first few short films I directed, when I would be challenged on something, whether it was by the DP or the actor or somebody, you get your back up and you're like, wait a minute, I'm the director here, and you don't want to look like an idiot. And so, you start arguing, and, basically your own insecurities start driving the train instead of you. And eventually, what you realize is that just makes for a worse film in the end. You have to listen to people's ideas, because it doesn't matter if someone comes up with a better idea than you and your idea gets thrown out, or it doesn't matter if, like, you tell the whole crew to do something and the DP's like, oh, that's a dumb idea, we should actually do this. It's better to go, oh yeah, he's right, rather than try to save face and be like, no, I'm the director, we're doing it this way. Because if he is right, it's going to show in the final film, and then people are going to realize you don't know what you're doing anyway. So better to just in that moment listen to somebody. And I think that's just something that comes with maturity and doing it longer and longer, directing longer and longer, is that you realize it has to be about the end goal, which is the film, and just get out of your own way. And when someone else has a better idea, it has to be best idea wins all the time. And that's just what I try to always remind myself. Best idea wins always. But the other thing is that I tell the story where I was shooting The Conspiracy, and when you're shooting a film, it is chaos. Like, it is so stressful, and every second money is going out the door. And there are a million problems that happen every day that are unforeseen. Cars break down that you have to have in the shot, and locations suddenly aren't available. Actors don't show up. Like, a million things go wrong, and you have to think on your feet in a way and just film everything you have to shoot that day, because on an independent film, you can't go do reshoots. You have to do it. And so it's chaos, and you're constantly running, and it's hyper stress, and it's like every day your movie's teetering on the brink of falling apart when you're shooting, and you have no sleep, and you're just going crazy. And so you're just executing the plan. It's so difficult to get like a bird's eye view when you're shooting, when you're writing, when you're in prepping, when you're editing, all the other parts of filmmaking, you kind of get a bird's eye view and sort of try to have a measured plan about how you're going to attack things. But when you're shooting, you're just trying to survive. That's all you're doing. And I always remember on The Conspiracy, eavesdropping on this conversation, one of the people on set, a sort of senior person, went up to another senior person, and one person said, so are we getting it? Are we getting it? And like, how's it going? And the other person went, oh yeah, we're getting it. We're getting it all. And I remember thinking to myself, that guy has no idea if we're getting it. He's saying it with such confidence. He has no clue. Nobody on set truly knows if the film's going well other than the director. Like, nobody. The actor doesn't. The DP doesn't. Nobody really understands if you are actually getting the pieces you need that will eventually assemble together. The director's the only one. And that's, in a weird way, one of the biggest skills you have to have, is in the midst of that chaos to be able to really look at each shot that you're shooting and be like, is this actually the piece I need, or am I going to get in the edit and realize, oh my God, everything's wrong. His emotional state doesn't match his emotional state in the moment before this, or the shirt's wrong, or or this is unnecessary. Like, the ability to in the middle of just a whirlwind of madness, sort of calm yourself and see what you're shooting for what it really is the biggest. One of the biggest skills you can have as a director, and it's the thing no one else is doing on set, because the DP is just executing the shot list, the producers are making sure things are on time, the actors are too immersed in the moment to get outside of it, and like, you're the only one that can see all of that. So, as much as you collaborate, and it is a huge collaboration, that's the reason it has to all filter through you, because you can feel like your DP is your partner, and he is in a lot of ways when you're shooting, but it's not his job to do that. It's not his job to step outside and make sure these pieces connect. It's his job to make sure each individual shot looks as good as it can. And so, again, just the more everything filters through one vision, one set of eyes, I think the stronger the film is ultimately.
I once had a conversation with a friend of mine where we determined that one of the most important skills a boss, leader, manager should have is to know what kind of donuts to order. And by that I mean We all know that it doesn't matter what kind of donuts you order. It doesn't matter where you get them from. It doesn't matter what they look like. It doesn't even matter if you order donuts in the first place. But it matters to everyone else. It doesn't matter to the product of the film, but it matters to the people who want a damn donut right now. And everyone will freak out until someone just makes that decision. And people always go to the leader to, when are we going to get, it's just such a simple, stupid decision unless it's delegated. But if you can't make that one, then as you said, people lose confidence in such a silly thing. People lose confidence because you don't know what kind of donuts to order, but it does happen. And also to have the humility to step forward and make such a small decision that really doesn't matter and make it graciously, make it on behalf of everybody. And of course, this donut thing can apply to so many other things. But I mean, going to what you're talking about, you're so focused on the big picture and getting the plan executed, but you're also needing to pat people on the head and make sure that they're happy. And that goes back to that balance between, the dictatorship and the collaboration, and knowing and making sure that people aren't creatively running away and that their creative doors are still open, so that not necessarily you need them to go fishing, but they feel that they can, and therefore it empowers the rest of their performance or the rest of their work on the set. And it's such an interesting idea because what we're talking about here is, where creativity meets execution and being the boss of a team. And it's such an interesting, that the crosshairs that go over the director in so many different, circumstances, whether it's in the French auteur tradition or the modern Hollywood exhausted director who's just doing a million different jobs at once and struggling to keep their focus on one thing. Wherever we look, it's this intersection, I think, between creativity and management. And I can't imagine there are many people who can do it, let alone do it well. And so kudos to you, obviously. I think when we watch a film, I wonder how much of that is hidden. Like, I wonder how many films I've seen that I thought were really good where the director lost out or the director was fired. I know that that's happened in movies before. And I guess this is a question about editing, like how it's sort of your second draft, really, or you're rewriting the screenplay in the editing room. How much, do you get to the editing room and realize that, oh, damn it, we don't have it? Or do you sometimes get there and realize that you can save it in a way that you never thought possible before?
I'd say a bit of both. I've never worked on a film, maybe no such film exists, but where you have all the time in the world and all the money in the world. I don't know what that's like to be able to, shoot as long as you want. And if you didn't get something, you get them in the reshoots. Like, I don't even know what that's like. So my experience filmmaking has always been, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough time. You got to figure out a way to do it. So every single day when I'm shooting is a Sophie's Choice day. There's 5 Sophie's Choice days where it's like, okay, we're losing light. It's not it's not even a matter of someone shutting you down. It's just like we're outside and we're not going to be able to shoot. We're not going to be able to see anything anymore. So we've got an hour left, but you've got 3 hours left that you need to shoot. So you have to, like, right on the spot with 100 people standing around waiting, figure out, okay, what parts of the film what scenes can I live without here and still tell the story? What shots can I live without and still to get the scene? And so every day shooting, you're doing stuff like that. And every day something goes wrong. Someone shows they have the wrong shirt or the wrong, so many problems have happened. We had someone backed up and took out a power pole and like knocked out power to the neighborhood when we were shooting, and then the cops were trying to shut us down. Like, every day there's some crazy thing that happens. So, and inevitably all that stuff affects the footage you get. And so you're just trying to get through it, survive it when you're shooting, and then you get in the edit and then you're like, oh, right, I had to lose that scene and I had to lose that scene and I never got the coverage of that angle of that actor. And you always go through a bit of a mourning period where you're like, okay, I set out hoping to get all this stuff and I got 80% of what I was setting out to get. And so eventually you get over that and just realize, well, I did get a pretty good 80%. So what's the best movie you can make with what you got? And then you do because you do end up cutting so much out in the edit. Like, there's like sometimes an hour and a half gets cut out of your movie, and it's like you had these big set pieces you were going crazy trying to put together and then try to shoot, and then you just cut them out of the movie because you have to like cut it down. So you get over it. You get over what you didn't get, and then and then you have to, like you say, it's your last draft of the script. And create something new. And yeah, I mean, there's certain, like you talk about the intersection of skill sets you need as a director. I mean, I think that is definitely true. And I mean, it's unnatural, like you're not, no, people aren't meant to be good at telling stories, but also good at dealing with the corporate world, but also good at talking to actors, but also good at talking to technicians. Like, it's an unnatural thing to ask, I think. Like, I think most directors are good at some of those things, but not all of them. It's rare. Sometimes there's these, like, someone like Spielberg is the most obvious example. Seems like he's good at all of it. He can sort of do it all. But I think, a lot of directors, I think, are shy, introverted people sometimes. And it's just not a profession that is conducive to that. It's like you have to be able to interact with so many different people who have their own languages, like even just the actors alone, forget everything else. Like, every actor wants to be directed in a different way, and every actor has their own language, that the sort of way they want to be spoken to. And you have to figure that out on the fly when you're shooting, again, with 100 people waiting and time, money going out the window every second. You have to figure out, like, does this actor want to talk a lot, and they want to stop and they want to really talk and talk and talk and talk about this. Whereas, excuse me, another actor doesn't want to be directed. Just give him the absolute least that you can. Give me one word and let me go. Some actors get confused easily. Some actors, like, are totally with it and, like, know the script better than you. And, like, just being able to, like, navigate all those different personalities and different ways to interact with just the actors alone is kind of a strange skill. But then you then extrapolate that to, like, okay, the crew, the crew's their own thing, and every different position on the crew, they all have their own way they like to interact. And then the money, the producers, or the financiers who visit, like, everybody is, there's so many different kinds of people making the movie, and you have to just sort of know how to interact with all those different people, which is just weird. It's something, like, I'm not good at it. Like, there's so many, there's just so many ways to screw that up. And it's a weird muscle to have to develop. It's like, how do I deal with all these different kinds of people? And you also have to, like, bring the hammer down sometimes. Like, some people are, you're always, like, balancing this, like, I'm naturally, I'm not a screamer or a yeller or anything like that, but there's certain times when you're like, this person, through them screwing up their job, are messing up my movie, and they're messing up all the work everyone's done and all the money going into this. And, long after I'm dead and gone, this movie's going to be here, and this stupid mistake's going to be in it forever because this idiot, isn't doing his job. And so even if you're not a yeller like I am, that can bring rage out of you really quickly. And so it's a balancing act of, like, how long to be nice, and then when to, like, really, let this person know. And all these things are just things, like, a painter doesn't have to deal with.
Well,
basically.
yeah, and it's like, the softer side of that is to say, well, what do people need? Do they need to be, for an actor, do I need to be yelled at, or do I need to be patted on the head? And sometimes both things can be extraordinarily useful and helpful, like a teacher, right? Which is another muscle that you have to build. But given just a bit of a change, just given all the different pressures in filmmaking, so whether it's the technology of making a film, whether it's, the industry with Netflix disrupting the film industry, how is filmmaking changing? Like, what are is it changing for you? Like, is being on the set and in the editing room today fundamentally different from, say, 8 years ago?
I mean, I don't think fundamentally it's different, but it's definitely, with technology, getting better and better and better, it's changed. Even, I remember when I was editing The Conspiracy, there were certain special effects we couldn't do in the edit. We had to wait until it went to the VFX house. But now there's things my editor can whip up in an instant, on his computer that look, flawless. So, like, the tools are getting better, the cameras are getting better. But I think it's fundamentally the same thing. It's not, an edit is still an edit, it's still the same creative process. And, things are just maybe not as expensive as they used to be from a visual effects standpoint. And, but other than that, I think it's pretty much the same thing. I mean, I think where things are really changing is the funding and distribution side of filmmaking. Like what gets funded, why does it get funded, and how does it get distributed? Like Netflix is just slowly taking over the world, and streamers are slowly taking over the world, and it's a weird situation where I'm one of those people that like wants my movie in a movie theater, and like I want people to go to see it and have the experience in the movie theater. And like I like Netflix, I use it all the time, but I also go to the movies all the time, and I don't really want my movie to just be on Netflix. But the problem is, Netflix has so much money. They can come into a film festival and throw enough money at a film that you have to say yes. Like you can't, they'll give you enough money that like people will actually make money on your film, and like no one's going to say no to that. And it's, and everyone uses Netflix, so lots of people are going to see it, and you're going to make money. Like it on paper, it's a win-win-win. But maybe I'm showing my age or my nostalgia or something, but I really want my movie in a movie theater. So I think a lot of people are struggling with this new paradigm that's evolving now with the streamers. But I also think it's, again, I'm not like anti-Netflix or anything. I use it. I use Amazon. I use all these things. But I do worry about the way everything is sort of curated for people now. Like everything is filtered through Netflix. Like I feel like, everybody gets their news from their Facebook feed or their Instagram feed, and like everybody gets their movies from Netflix, and like so like Netflix, it used to be if I wanted to sound like a film snob to somebody, I had to reference some old Fassbender, Godard film or something. Now all I have to do is reference a movie that's not on Netflix, and they're like, "What's that?" Like you must be a real film connoisseur. Like, no, it's just it's Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, just not on Netflix, so you don't know it. Like it's just kind of a little bit scary, like everybody's sense of what films are out there these days, especially younger people growing up with this, just like Netflix decides what my movies are, and Netflix decides what movies exist in the world. And like it's just this tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the movies that are out there that are movies that are made every year. And I just feel like that's going to be happening more and more and more, and like obviously lots of competition for Netflix is popping up now, but still, everyone having their taste curated by these streaming platforms is just a little scary to me.
Well, and I think this is happening in many different parts of our society and culture today, that our lives are being curated by something that we've handed over our keys to, whether, as you said, Netflix for movies or Facebook for the news, but I think Amazon for shopping. I mean, there's really very few things now that I can do totally on my own, that I don't have some guide, whether it's Google Maps or Alexa or something, essentially helping me out, but also closing in the blinders a little bit. And to me, when it comes to film, that makes non-Netflix movies all the more important for people to see, and not just to support them, but to get a different flavor in life. You might not like it, and that's okay. It's okay to see a movie you don't like. You might learn something. You might discover something. For me, coming from the theater, some of the best plays I've ever seen were ones that I hated in the first 20 minutes. I hated them. This is boring. This is stupid. Why am I here? And then I started to learn the language that it was speaking and realize that this was just something different that I hadn't caught up to yet. And by the end of it, it had changed my view of the world. And movies have done the same thing to me. But only when I've decided to sit down in something that I might not want to see, whether it's a horror movie or whether it's a rom-com that, this is going to be boring. It might show you something that you're not ready for. And if all you're going to do is follow what's recommended to you on Netflix or on Facebook newsfeed or on Amazon, then you might be missing the chance to broaden yourself and be a bigger, better, stronger, more interesting person.
Yeah, Netflix, with their algorithms, they try to figure out, you like watching this kind of movie, so we recommend these movies. Like, what are the kind of things you like to watch, and let's just give you more of that. So it's rarely like, so you watch that, that romantic comedy. Why don't you try this weird experimental French film? That never happens.
In fact,
Netflix,
because
right?
You watch romantic comedies, you need to see this to be to have a broader mind, for example.
That's what it should be. That's what the smarter algorithm would do.
Yeah.
But it's just like you like this flavor of ice cream. Here's more of this flavor, more of this flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, it's not broadening your horizons at all.
Right, and it's difficult. This is the market economy. Like people aren't going to. If I like chocolate ice cream, I'm not going to want to be served licorice, right? But even if as a parent, I would know, well, my kid should really try those mushrooms. I know they're not going to like them, but one day they'll be better for it. And, well, I don't want Netflix to be my parent, but at the same time, are we as a whole culture becoming more and more narrow and therefore more and more polarized? Because those who watch rom-coms and those who watch horror movies are less and less connected because they don't watch the same things anymore. That leads to political polarization. That leads to us feeling very, very different from one another, and I can therefore not empathize with the person on the other side of it because we're not seeing the same movies, watching the same news channels, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so much of all this, whether it's, Facebook, all these sort of online behemoths, so much is about data collection, right? And like, what can we learn about our users? What can we learn about their tastes in order to sell them more stuff? And it's all about like trying to learn your taste so that, and what kind of books do you like to order? What kind of like websites do you go to? Everything. They can like create a profile of who you are based on your online activity. And so how do we give them more of what they've already been asking for? And it's there's obviously good sides and bad sides to everything. It's not like a black and white thing, but as an example, you brought up Amazon. Like I was really looking for a book I needed for research. It was an old science fiction book from the early '80s, and I looked on Amazon and I didn't see it. And I think I tried one other like online shopping place. I didn't see it. And I had this feeling of like, oh, I'm never going to get that book. And then I remembered I live right across the street from like a used bookstore, but it didn't. It didn't even. I almost gave up, and I was like, wait a minute, it's right there. And I walked over, and of course, it's right there on the shelf. And I was just like, that was a little lesson learned. Is like you can't get sucked into this. Like forget that you live in the real world. And it's the same thing, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, and in fact, if you do, that bookstore will no longer be there.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I love here in Toronto, Bay Blu-ray Video is one of my favorite, Blu-ray DVD places. And, I hope it never goes out of business, but I always worry about it because, do you want to just go, and I know they have a better selection there, but Netflix is right in my living room. So maybe I will watch Ant-Man and the Wasp just because, it's right here instead of going and getting that like actually good movie at Bay Blu-ray. So, it's one of those weird things where, you have to remind yourself not to give in to the ease and comfort of this all the time because it literally does whatever the opposite is of broadening your horizons, narrows your horizons.
So, Chris, last question. What's the film you're working on now, and when can we expect maybe to take a look at it?
So, the film I'm working on now is called The Education of Fredrick Fitzell. The cast is Dylan O'Brien, who's the star of the Maze Runner movies, Micah Monroe from It Follows, Emery Cohen, Keir Gilchrist. It's about it's a hard movie to put an easy label on, but it's I would say it's a psychological thriller is the closest sort of genre I could make it compared to. It's about this guy who's like he's approaching 30. He's sort of feeling like he's being forced into going from being a boy to an adult. He's deciding whether or not he should give up on his dream of being an artist and take an office job. His girlfriend sort of wants to get married. His mother is very sick and on her deathbed. All these sort of signposts of like aging and becoming a true grown-up are sort of all around him. And then right at that moment in his life, he gets hit with these really sort of terrifying and psychedelic flashbacks. Drug flashbacks to these sort of drug experiences he had when he was a teenager that he'd forgotten. And so he, when he was a teenager, he took this sort of experimental drug with his friends, and it was so powerful and so sort of trippy and hallucinogenic that he blocked out a lot of it. And so now, as this like 30-year-old man, he starts having these like sort of terrifying flashes back to those experiences, and he knows something bad happened, and this girl who he used to hang out with has sort of gone missing from those days, and he then journeys into his past, sort of like literally and metaphorically, to avoid facing the future. And he tracks down his old drug buddies, and they all sort of try to figure out the mystery of what happened in those days, and where this girl went, and what might have happened to her. And then this whole sort of world opens up from there. But it's the only movie I could ever sort of compare it to is sort of like a Jacob's Ladder sort of vibe. It's kind of scary, and it's very trippy and surreal, but I think also like very moving, and something I think people will identify with. Just that sort of being sort of forced into growing up kind of phase that we all get forced into. Yeah, sort of like being forced to watch Netflix movies.
That sounds really interesting. I think especially because it fits into the adage that all good stories are detective stories. And it sounds like from the stuff that you've written and directed, there's always this sense of we got to figure this out, and without judgment, right? And just one last comment on your film, The Conspiracy. And this is going back to the idea of having one voice. One thing that I found really interesting about that film is that it's about conspiracy theories, but at no point do I feel that the voice that is directing and writing this film is judging what conspiracy theories are, and or making them sound hokey or stupid, nor is it embracing them. Right. Nor is it saying that these are all true and there's a real conspiracy, right? It's actually looking at it dispassionately and telling a detective story within. And I think it sounds like that might apply to what you're talking about here. I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this film probably wouldn't judge drug use, for example. No. Right, but nor would it say, "Hey, go do drugs."
Yeah, you're totally right about the detective thing. I mean, that's probably my favorite type of story. My favorite genre is detective stories. I was funny. I've been talking with people on the film about it. It's so many movies that have drug use in them. They part of the deal of it is often that you have to show that why this is bad. You have to show these people becoming destitute. You have to show their lives falling apart. You have to show them accidentally killing a baby. You have to, show drugs are bad. And I'm not saying they're not bad. I'm not saying this. Obviously, there's horrible parts of this, but this is a fictional drug in this film, and but it's not a film. It's not about that at all. It's not about addiction. It's not about that side of drug use. It's about the other side of drug use, which people rarely talk about, which is, not for things like, cocaine or heroin or that stuff that's sort of just terrible and takes lives, but for like LSD and peyote and some of the more hallucinogenic drugs, for some people it's an exploration, like it truly is. The reason you take it is not to feel good, it's not to like be stupid and eat Doritos. It's like you take those kind of things to explore, to perceive your life differently, to perceive the universe differently. And as much as people try sometimes more, people who aren't, I guess, maybe brave enough to venture to those places, try to minimize that kind of exploration and make, you're just imagining things, or it's just you being flaky and staring at your own navel. It's not what I believe at all about that kind of stuff. I think that there's some of the most profound moments I've ever had in my life were in my youth on those kind of substances. So, in a weird way, it's almost like a little love letter, this film, to my days, exploring, so to speak.
There's an interesting parallel here, actually, that some people watch movies to chill out and eat Doritos and have a good time, and some people watch movies to be transported and to change their perspective of the world. Chris, this has been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure. Thanks.
To learn more about Chris MacBride, go to the website, whatonearthisgoingon.ca. There you can find all previous episodes and ways to get in touch with me, to tell me what you think about this episode and give me your feedback, and let me know what you think about future episodes, what guests you'd like to have on the show, and what topics you'd like to have discussed. Now, your quote of the week is from filmmaker Orson Welles, and he said that the enemy of art is the absence of limitations. Thanks, as always, to our composer, Andrea Wetstein, for giving us this wonderful music, and special thanks to Chris MacBride for letting us record in his Toronto studio. Next week, we're at Toronto's Ryerson University to discuss the future of the city with Adam Brynd, Pamela Robinson, and Blair Scorgie. I'll see you then.